screen is on.
Mayor, can you speak into the, sorry, because we are live streaming.
Sorry, some people aren't trainable, so my apologies. For the record then, I would like to call this work session meeting of the Manitou Springs City Council to order. This is the meeting for August the 10th, 2021. And we'll begin with the roll call. City clerk's not here, so I'll go ahead with that. Councilman Shada? Here. Councilor Johnson?
Here.
Councilor Chandler?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Present.
Councilor Wolf?
Here.
Councilor Bremner?
Here.
And the mayor is also here. Good, great. All right, we have 4 discussion items tonight. A discussion of our water system, a comprehensive water system report. We'll also hear from the Carnegie Library folks for their 60-day update, and also the 60-day update from the Hiawatha Gardens Task Force. And then our last item will be a COVID discussion, and we will be having some other people here to discuss the issue with us. So let's go ahead and get started. Comprehensive Water System Report. Jeff Jones, our Public Works Director, you have the floor.
All right, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and council members. We do have 3 speakers, 2 other speakers besides us here tonight. So I would ask, because it may be a little lengthy, and in respect for the time for others, if you have any questions, please write them down and send them to Mr. Roy Cheney, and we'll get your answers back on them if we could. Okay?
Good, thank you.
So we do have with us tonight, we have Russ Mills, who's the water superintendent, myself, the public works manager. We also have Gary Thompson from Wheeler Engineering, who will be giving us a brief, as well as Julianne Wooldridge, who is a water attorney. We'll be speaking later. Little background on Gary, and I don't have background on Julianne, but she's going to brief you on that, is that he assisted Manitou Springs Augmentation Plan in 2015 and set up accounts for it. He also has been a long-term water rights consultant for Security, Widefield Fountain, and also Fountain Mutual Jets. And he's also familiar with complexities of water rights along Fountain Creek. He's also helped out Castle Rock, Golden, Excel Energy, Cripple Creek, Victor. And he's got 40 years experience of all this. So he'll give us a good briefing. He has a lot of information to share. So with that, and I'm going to try to run these slides from here. We will see how that works. We're going to start out with Russ Mills here, and he's going to give you a briefing on our water master plan. A little background, it's from they hired a company in 2017 called IMED Corporation. And IMED Corporation come out, and part of their division specializes in water maintenance and infrastructure. They did a water master plan and gave suggestions for improvements to the water system to help with the maintenance and the infrastructure. Of course, we weren't here at that time, but now we are, and we're going to try to implement that and give you some information behind it. So with that, I will turn it over to Russ.
Hit the next one, probably. Okay, so in this we'll cover the, we'll have an overview of the city, our raw water system, which includes our reservoir, the diversion structure along front. Oh, sorry. Okay, we will cover in the overview of the city, our raw water system, which includes our reservoir, the diversion structure along French Creek, below the dam, and the raw water line to the treatment plant. We will also cover the treatment plant and distribution system, and finally our infrastructure repair and financial plans. Okay, Manitou Springs is home to approximately 5,000 residents. The city covers 3.2 square miles of land containing over 150 historic structures, including 27 historic arch bridges. Many homes are over 100 years old, and the approximate 30 miles of streets serving these residences are often narrow and steep. Before developing the water master plan, IMA conducted an in-depth review of historic documents and maps in possession of the city. Some maps were dated as early as 1889. By collecting historic and recent data, we were able to develop a deep understanding of the city's water system. Sorry. Okay. So this is covering the reservoir. Sediment at the inlet to the reservoir needs to be removed. The gabion filter could use some repairs. The state dam inspector wants flumes at the inlet and a third on the outlet to better track flows from the reservoir. To better protect our water supply, fire mitigation needs to be performed at several places around our reservoir and along French Creek to our intake. Next. Okay, approximately 2 miles east from the dam is a diversion structure in French Creek. Water is released from the reservoir and from South French Creek to flow to the structure. Water flows into a retention-style pond and then to a series of 3 sedimentation basins, which allow the sediment to settle prior to the city's raw water force main. Yeah. Oh, sorry. The diversion structure needs repairs and possible upgrades, which include redoing the pond because of delamination in the concrete. The upgrades will help remove sediment better and keep it from passing through to the raw water main. Security around the site is also quite limited and could be greatly improved. Next.
So I'd like to add that that structure is not failed. It's just delamination of the outer coating of the concrete there. So it's nothing to panic over. It just needs to be fixed.
I'm just looking to see. Okay. Oh, next one, actually. Oh, yeah, this is yours.
Okay. On this here, on the French Creek diversion structure, we have several repairs that were recommended for making. So what I'm doing is I'm putting this in our 5-year to 10-year SIP plan to break it down so it's doable. Some of the ones that are lower cost we'll be able to do sooner. For example, the repair concrete reservoir dam, as we've seen earlier. We're going to try to schedule that for 2023. Increase capacity, improve sediment removal. That's going to be quite pricey, so we're going to get repricing on that, and that's probably stretched out to a 5-year plan. What is that called? The turbine meter? Turbatometer? And what is that, Russ? Because I don't have any idea.
Turbidity is sediment in the water. It causes it's basically like floating particles in the water. Is turbidity.
And this meter, what it'll do, it'll tell you how much parts per million you have of those particles. Also install a flow meter, which is important. That'll probably be about 3 years from now, 2 to 3 years. Then increase security of the site. And basically increase security of the site is just talking about more fencing, more chain link fencing, and securing the area a little bit. Because the worst thing you could have happen is someone poison your water supply, which would affect everyone drastically.
Okay, this is just a map of the raw water pipeline that was replaced in 2018 and should be trouble-free for decades to come. Next. Okay, at the treatment plant, we have a hydroelectric that has been installed and tested. We are waiting on CSU and regional building for final sign-offs to have it up and running, which will supply most, if not all, the power needed to run the treatment plant. One of our 3 filters has already been repaired and rebuilt. We still need to do the same to the other 2 filters.
And I'd like to add on the hydro plant is that not only will it help pay for it, but already with it hooked up to the solar, it may pay for it completely, which those savings will be pushed down to the consumers here in Manitou Springs.
Okay, this is a map of our distribution system, which is made up of approximately 2/3 50-plus-year-old pipe. Most pipes have roughly a 30-year life expectancy. Also, 1/3 to half of water mains don't fit the 6-inch minimum requirement, which is for fire flow mostly. Also have approximately 1 tenth of the mains are dead end, which doesn't allow for system looping, which affects water quality, and all of these things affect fire protection by not allowing enough volume to sufficiently fight fires. Next. Mesa tank has been in need of repair for several years. Roof structure is rusting and needs repaired or replaced. The whole tank needs to be drained and recoated inside and out for more storage and to make repairs less of a disruption that needs perfect timing due to usage, and as a fail-safe, adding a second 1 to 2 million gallon tank near the treatment plant is suggested. Need to replace aging and undersized water mains covered on previous slides, as well as PRVs, which are pressure reducing valves, which we will cover next.
So just to touch on the Mesa water tanks, we have 1 2 million gallon existing tank. And on that tank, what we're doing is we have an RFP out right now to replace some of the valving that goes from that tank, as well as a bypass valving in preparation for possibly building a new Mesa tank number 2 beside it. And it could be 1 million gallon, it could be up to 2 million gallons, depending on price, because right now price for steel and everything else is extremely high. So we'll see about that. Well, what we want to do first is get the valving in, and then after we do the valving, we're going to wait till the off fire hazard months, which will be the fall, or November and possibly December. We'll drain that tank down while we still have Crystal Hills tank over there that we can use for firefighting flow. And with that, what we want to do is mitigate some of the rust inside and recoat it the way it should be, so it'll last another 10, 15 years, if not longer. And then after that, once we get that done and get that tank filled back up, and then we have that tank as well as the Crystal Hills tank, then we'll be working toward getting a new tank built. That will double our capacity. It's what we're hoping for. It's what we're looking for. And that would be a big deal as far as, especially as scarce water is, and especially here in Colorado, to have double your capacity, whether it be for firefighting, whether it be for, just consumption or whatever, it would be a big deal. Or if we go into a summertime that's extremely hot and we're under restrictions, it would help us out tremendously.
Got it already. Oh, back. Okay, this is a pressure reducing valve. These valves help to keep the water pressure to a safe and manageable level throughout the town. We have 13 PRVs in town and 9 different pressure zones. Many of these have not been maintained in years, which can cause them to operate poorly or not at all, which could cause hammering in pipes, which is pressure surges. The valve doesn't operate smoothly. It kind of, that's where you get like a chattering in it. Water to stop flowing, that's if the valve sticks closed, or high pressure, which is if the valve sticks open. These need to become a priority to help maintain system integrity as well as functionality. Next. Oh, and then also the state requires testing for lead in the water yearly, and our results have come back good on those every year. Okay, our financial plan is laid out to prioritize projects due to the following criteria: failing pipe with several leaks or issues historically, pipe that is not sufficiently sized for fire protection, too small and to allow sufficient fire flow to fight fires, which is a minimum of 6 inches, which I mentioned earlier. Looping for fire protection and water quality. Looping ties mains together so there are no dead ends, which in turn helps with flow, allowing for better water quality and fire protection. And need for overall system integrity. Looking at each of the previous criteria and determining which project will provide the best improvement for the system as a whole. Our costs are based on a rough cost of approximately $100 per lineal foot, which due to current inflation and supply chain issues may need to be adjusted up a bit more. Next. And now we're on the questions.
Okay, so we'll go to the questions. Will be, please submit your questions for us, unless you have something pressing right now, because we got to have time for these folks who drove out here to have time to do their briefings too. Roy?
Yeah, if council has no objections, why don't we go ahead and allow the presenters to make their presentations, and then we can maybe hopefully we'll have a little time to entertain questions and some discussion. And when we run out of time, we'll, I guess, write down questions and give them to Roy and get an answer back at some
Yes,
point.
sir, that'd be great, because they have some really good information to pass on to you.
Okay. Also, we're going to have a tour on September the 17th, I believe. It's a day-long tour, so that's going to be a real hands-on field trip. So that additionally will provide more information. So, okay.
Mayor,
Okay.
may I just say something?
Sure.
I just want to say, it looks like when you look at this, that there's a lot to do, and there is, and it will be addressed in our capital plan when we do the budget. So please keep this presentation, and as you have questions, send them, but we'll be looking at this from a capital perspective of what happens, especially with the 5-year rate case that we did, which we have 3 more years to go through, and that they'll be looking at those projects accordingly.
Good. Thank you for that clarification. All right. All right, sir. Yes, if you could give us your full name and title, and you have the floor.
All right, I'm Gary Thompson with Wheeler and Associates, Water Resources Engineers. Out of our office is in Inglewood. I think Jeff had kind of introduced me a little bit before. I need to be closer? Really close. Okay. Okay. And I know we're all getting used to masks again, so that's how it is. All right, I have my slide presentation here, and I'm really just going to try to tell this as a story. First of all, I'm just going to, first of all, just go through the conclusions, and then...
Would you please put your mask over your nose for us? Thank you.
Sure. Okay, thanks. I'll just go through the conclusions, and then I will go through the explanation of how I reached that. So I think that Manitou Springs has excellent water rights, excellent reserve supplies, and resilience in your water rights and water supply for droughts and emergencies. And then extra capacity for growth in the future. So, how do I reach these conclusions? To start with, some basic terminology that I'll be using. Cubic feet per second is cubic feet per second is how water is typically measured in flow for water rights related. 1 CFS is for 24 hours is essentially 2 acre feet. Just to think about that. And the town's annual water demand is something like 660 acre feet in a year. So that's just kind of a way to think about it. Acre feet, storage in reservoirs is measured in acre feet. And Manitou Reservoir has a capacity of 710 acre feet. Oops, I need to go back. How do I go back? Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, water in Colorado, the use of water is based on the priority system. That means the first water user that showed up and appropriated a water right long ago has the first right to the water. And water rights, so Fountain Creek, French Creek, Fountain Creek is a tributary of the Arkansas River. And so administration of water, all the water rights, all the way down the Arkansas River to Kansas, are administered in one single priority system. So if the most senior water right happened to be somewhere down on the Arkansas, that would be the first water right, and it would get all the water it needed up to its up to the limit of its appropriation usually in cubic feet per second. Happily, the most senior rights are not way down there. They are the most senior rights are up on Fountain Creek and one of your water rights. Strict administration. Now, that is really in which the state engineer and his employees administer all of these water rights up and down the Arkansas and up Fountain Creek strictly. So if your water right is out of priority because there's a downstream water right that is more senior and that is not getting enough water, that downstream senior water right just calls out your upstream more junior water right. There's no mercy. It's just done on a strict administration basis. And I'll be talking about that quite a bit more. Your direct flow and storage rights. Your Manitou Reservoir has a storage right, so it's to store the 710 acre feet. Your Manitou Waterworks right is a direct flow right, so it's not limited to any volume. It's just a flow rate. You can take water based on this flow rate. There's no volume limit to it. Okay. This is just a schematic showing Manitou Springs Reservoir, Manitou Reservoir, your diversion off of French Creek, and then the pipeline that leads to the water treatment plant. And I'll be also talking about this crossover connection with a Colorado Springs pipeline. There, oops, shoot. Back. Okay, I'll just need help here to go back one. Right. Okay. Yes. Okay. So, in 1887, the town of Manitou Springs appropriated this 3 CFS water right on French Creek. So I'm just going to say they appropriated that and they were happy about that. But the problem was that when the first settlers came into El Paso County and Pueblo County in the early 1860s, water users had been, or pioneers had come and they would dig ditches so they could irrigate corn and barley and wheat and potatoes and whatever. And that all began in 1860. So the very earliest water rights were appropriated in 1860, 1861. And so these, as water rights were appropriated and these ditches got built, they were using up really all of the water in Fountain Creek. And then down the Arkansas, water rights were being appropriated down on the main stem, Arkansas, on down the river. So the party was pretty much over by the time of statehood in 1876. All of the water had been mostly appropriated by water users, and so the really good water rights have 1860s dates up into the 1870s a little bit. this 1887 water right for Manitou Springs is just hopelessly junior to these downstream water users. So, okay, so switching gears a little bit. Mr. Clark, Henry Clark, was an early pioneer. He apparently arrived in the area in 1860, one of the first pioneers, and kind of the first thing he did was started digging a ditch off of Fountain Creek down in what is now the Widefield area. And he was one of the very first people. 7 CFS was the measurement of how big his ditch was going to be. And this is a very early water right. So apparently in Manitou Springs, they realized that their 1887 water right was not going to be sufficient, so they bought that water right from whoever owned it in 1894. And there's a notation that says that it was $12,000 was paid by Manitou Springs for this. And then they transferred that water right up to your current diversion point, and really just sort of put that on top of that 1887 water right that's almost useless. So this Clark Ditch water right, which is now your Waterworks water right, is priority 2.5 on Fountain Creek. And the priority 1 and priority 2 are owned by Colorado Springs, and they transfer those up to other locations in their Pikes Peak collection system and on other creeks. So effectively, your priority 2.5 is completely reliable from the point of view that there is effectively no other water right downstream of it that could call it out. There's a little piece of a little tiny priority 1 that's downstream of it, but it's in Fountain Creek, and Fountain Creek would have to be down to just a trickle and before it to be out of water. And if it ever got to such a drought, French Creek is going to be dry anyway, just because if there's only a trickle in Fountain Creek, there's nothing on French Creek to be diverted. So your water right is fabulous, 7 CFS. Now, that diverts from French Creek, as you know. The creek flow is highly variable throughout the year, lots in the spring runoff, gets down pretty low in droughts and in winter, but it does flow year-round. And that water is diverted into your intake up to the needs of the town. Okay, so what are the needs of the town? This is a graph showing the monthly water use as measured by the records. This is just average of the 2016 through 2020. I mean, you can see that it's more in summer because people water their lawns, and maybe there's more tourism. And those are in acre feet. For the overall course of the year, the 2016 to 2020 average has been 654 acre feet of water that you diverted. And the peak day, it looks to me as something around this 2.4 cubic feet per second, or something, maybe a little more than that, but it's down in that neighborhood. Your water right, again, is for 7 CFS. So your water right is plenty big for peak day plus more, except, as we know, in droughts, maybe there's not that much water in French Creek to be diverted. But the water right itself is great. Looking back to the annual total amount of water, I look back and I see that back in 20 or so years ago, the annual water usage was much more than it is currently. It was 1,000 acre feet little over 1,000 acre-feet a year, kind of average each year. And it's declined a lot. But that is similar to what's been going on in other towns throughout Colorado. The water usage drops. And that's because people naturally remodel their kitchens and their bathrooms. And so when you put in a new dishwasher, it is just going to be a lower water using dishwasher because that's all that's sold. Shower heads use less water than they used to when you remodel. Washing machines, faucets, everything just goes to less water use. And that just happens automatically. People aren't necessarily having to make a conscious decision to do this. It just happens when you remodel. And people remodel over the years. And then sprinkler systems in your lawns are more efficient. So anyway, and maybe some leaks have been repaired in the distribution system to lower the water usage as well. I know nothing about that, but that would contribute to the reduced water demand. Okay, Manitou Reservoir. That has a water right priority date of 1912. So it's rarely in priority. That's just a very junior date for the water right. Has a capacity of 710 acre feet though, and it evaporates. You know, it's estimated to be about 35 acre feet a year that evaporates out of it. So, and under strict administration of water rights, when the water evaporates, it's gone. So, and even if the reservoir is actually sitting full all the way to the spillway, a calculation is done of how much water has evaporated, and you basically owe that evaporated water. You would be, if you had no way to replace that water, you would be year after year required to lower that lake level a little bit, which would be, a real hassle for the operating of the reservoir, but you'd be supposed to lower it down until or unless you have if this water right comes into priority, or until you have some other way to fill the lake back up, which I'll be talking about. Okay, so I talked a little bit about strict administration of water rights, but back in the day, back maybe before 2002 or so, the Manitou water rights were not really strictly administered by the state engineer. So what happened was water would be diverted at your French Creek diversion under its 1861 water right. That's, of course, great. That's in accordance with the water right. Then if there was a drought or just low water availability in Manitou Reservoir, they would draw some water out of the reservoir a little bit to help out with the pipeline. And then when it rained, they would just fill the reservoir back up. And the evaporation, nobody worried about the evaporation. So, and all of it just worked. It was just great. You just did it. And I think that's really just because French Creek is kind of up there, kind of by itself. It's out of the way, and nobody paid that much attention. Okay, then in 2002, there was a bad drought, terrible drought. And for all of you that were here at that time, you remember that. There was the big Hayman fire. Drought, French Creek flows were very low, and just to keep the water system operating, roughly 210 acre feet got drawn down out of Manitou Reservoir, which effectively meant the water level had dropped by 8 feet or so. Then it rained, and the reservoir filled right back up. And because the drought was so terrible, and the water administration officials were really under a lot of pressure to do strict administration everywhere, I mean, this really caught the attention of the state engineer and division engineer's office. I mean, how did you fill that reservoir back up with your 1912 water right? It was out of priority that entire time. And so they really explained to Manitou Springs that something has to be done to deal with this. So now I'm going to change subjects a little bit for a moment to the Frying Pan, Arkansas project, Fry-Ark project. Manitou Springs is within the district, the Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District, which is the managing district for the Fry-Ark project. And what that means is that everybody in Manitou Springs has been paying a little bit of property tax since I'm not sure, 1960s, I guess, way back, for the Southeastern project. And so therefore you are entitled to water from that project. But, you know, there's no pipeline to get that water here. And exactly how much water is it that Manitou Springs is entitled to? And I understand that in 2008 that the allocation for Manitou Springs was set at 0.35%, like 0.35% of the total Fry-Ark project is your share of the water. And the amount of water, so the Fry-Ark project diverts water from the headwaters of the Colorado River, kind of near Aspen, and it brings it through and sends it down to Turquoise Reservoir and Twin Lakes, and then the biggest reservoir, Pueblo Reservoir. And that's where the water is. The amount that they divert by that project is variable from year to year. In some years it can be 50 or 60,000 acre feet, and in drought years they are not allowed to divert anywhere near that much. It's really a much smaller amount. But that 0.35% works out to being up to 190 acre feet per year in wet years, much less in droughts. And that water, your share of that water then has just been accumulating in Pueblo Reservoir, and it's currently up to about 770 acre feet. So there's the picture of Pueblo Reservoir. In that lake is 770 acre feet that Manitou Springs owns, which is great. How do you get it to Manitou Springs? So you can see this is sort of a schematic of like where Pueblo Reservoir is upstream of the city of, and then Fountain Creek joins the Arkansas River a ways downstream of Pueblo Reservoir, and your French Creek diversion is up on edges of Pikes Peak. It's a tributary of Fountain Creek. How are you going to get that water here? So the answer to that is pursuant to the 2008 exchange decree, which includes 3 exchanges. Fountain Creek Exchange, well, here they are, and I'm going to talk about each one of those. The Fountain Creek Exchange is let's just say that an acre foot has evaporated out of Manitou Reservoir, just for the sake of the discussion here. There's an acre foot is owed at Manitou Reservoir. So what you do is you tell Reclamation, who runs Pueblo Reservoir and the Friar Project, to release 1 acre-foot out of your account from Pueblo Reservoir, and that water then just flows, gets released through the outlet works and goes down the Arkansas River. At the same time, then, that 1 acre-foot that really should have been released out of Manitou Reservoir to cover the evaporation, instead is just kept up there. So water users down on the main stem Arkansas are kept whole down on the Arkansas. 1 is released to them, and 1 is stored at the reservoir. Now, that only works if water users along Fountain Creek itself are satisfied with the amount of water in the creek there, because it's if they're the ones that are needing that water, you're taking that 1 acre-foot away from them. Happily, though, there are many times throughout the year, or if there's good flows in Fountain Creek, and there's water flowing in those irrigation ditches, et cetera, have the water that they need, this exchange can be done. And it's operated frequently throughout the year. And that's how your evaporation losses are covered, by releasing throughout the course of the year in little bits the 35 acre-feet out of your account at Pueblo Reservoir, allowing Manitou Reservoir to stay full. Very cool. And that it would work the same way if you had to, in a drought, draw water out of Manitou Reservoir so that you had enough water in your municipal system, and you had to draw the reservoir down by a lot of acre-feet, then you would draw down the reservoir, but then when it rained and there was sufficient flow to operate this exchange, that's what would be done. So the water would be drawn from your account in Pueblo Reservoir, the exchange would be operated, you fill it back up, and there you go. The Upper Fountain Creek Exchange this is another thing. I have to say it's hardly been used at all, or maybe very little. So this involves your wastewater. So sewage from Manitou Springs goes down to the Las Vegas wastewater treatment plant, where it's treated and discharged into Fountain Creek. If you were using water out of Manitou Reservoir that was colored as your Friart project water, like currently you have several hundred acre-feet of Friart project water sitting in your reservoir. So if you were using that water, sending it to the water treatment plant, most of it ends up as wastewater going to the wastewater plant. You are entitled to buy the return flows at a very low price from the Southeastern District. And you can then, let's say on a given day you had 5 acre-feet going into your municipal system. 3 of that ends up as wastewater. You could by exchange, if there was sufficient water up on French Creek, you could exchange that back up into the reservoir and get credit for it, and you'd have it back. I'm just saying this has not been used much, but on paper it's a water right that you have. And I'm going to talk about the French Creek Exchange. I'm going to come to that in a minute. Back to Manitou Reservoir administrative account. People often, the term is often called, the river account. Evaporation. The evaporation is occurring like every day a little bit, tiny, tiny bits. So that Russ doesn't have to lower the reservoir by this 1/8 of an inch every few days, which would be super hard to keep the reservoir water level just below the lip of the spillway. I mean, how could you do that? The state engineer allows you to have a owe the river account where you can just go ahead and keep the lake full, but you know that you owe that bit of water to cover the evaporation, and you just wait until you have an opportunity to run the Fountain Creek exchange, and then you balance the books then. So this is like the one place where they do provide a little bit of grace in the strict administration of water rights. And it's just done for practical reasons. And all the reservoirs in the state, as far as I know, are allowed to do this to a very limited extent. And this would also be used if you had to lower the lake just because you needed the water on a few days where it was super hot and dry, and you had to take water out of the lake to fully have enough water going to your water treatment plant. You lower the lake a bit, owe the river account, and you pay it back when you can. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the French Creek exchange. And this is a really different kind of an exchange. It involves Colorado Springs utilities. So in order to really be able to use your Fry Art project water, though, you would really want, if the situation comes up where you need a lot of water, you would need to be able to, you can't do this Fountain Creek exchange very often in a drought, but there is this crossover connection with Colorado Springs Old North Slope pipeline, where, I've not seen this, but I understand that there's a way, there's a valve, and then water can be discharged from their pipeline into your pipeline. Okay, and the way this exchange works is by agreement with Colorado Springs. They have agreed that they will, they're willing to put water into your pipeline at the crossover connection, and that is a way to get Fry Art project water physically delivered into your pipeline. Now, Colorado Springs has two pipelines that physically deliver Fry Art project water to Colorado Springs. There's their relatively new Southern Delivery System pipeline, and then the older Fountain Valley Conduit pipeline. So these are pipelines from Pueblo Reservoir that go up to Colorado Springs that delivers Fry Art project into their overall municipal system. Their North Slope system is sort of a part of their overall municipal system, and so by just doing some bookkeeping kind of entries, you can just say, well, that some of the Fry Art project water that they are getting is the water in that North Slope system, just kind of a bookkeeping entry. So that can be your Fry Art project water. And down at Pueblo Reservoir, then you can book over that much water over into Colorado Springs' account there. So you can get Fry Art project water. Per the agreement, that is limited to 250 acre-feet per year. But the agreement says that Colorado Springs may, at their discretion, increase that if at their discretion in a certain year if you needed it. So you certainly have 250 acre-feet that you can get by making giving 5-day notice, but probably really less than that in actuality. A phone call and an email, you can have this water delivered into the crossover connection. Under the terms of the agreement, though, this is not free. the current cost for this is $750 an acre foot. That's the cost that Colorado Springs Utilities charges for having this water delivered, effectively delivered all the way from Pueblo Reservoir through its pipeline system and all of its system to get it to that location. And another way to think of that is that's about $2.30 per 1,000 gallons. This is how much that costs. The agreement is for a term of years, and the current agreement expires at the end of 2024. But that would be a matter to be negotiated to get that extended for additional years. And I'm not aware of any reason why it would not be extendable, but that is what it says. So that water is sitting effectively as a reserve supply. Two other water right matters, or small water rights I want to point out. You also own the Manitou Iron Springs pipeline water right. So this one's priority 2. It's even better. It's March 1861. It's on Ruxton Creek, but it's a very, very small amount, 0.099 CFS. That's like 1/70th as large as your French Creek water right. So this is very small. It's decreed for municipal and domestic use, and which includes irrigation of parks. It's currently not being used. It's available for you to use at any time, but currently not being used, and just because it's kind of hard to use because of the sprinkler heads, I understand, and that sort of thing. But there it is. There's also an augmentation plan is what it's called, but it's really just a way to cover for the mineral springs. If that water is used to be bottled or used in, physically actually used in some way. Bottling would be a great example. They bottle it and sell it. That's water that's really tributary to the Fountain Creek. It's part of the priority system. You're really not entitled to use that water for any purpose other than, looking at it, smelling it and such as it comes out of the springs. But if to the extent that any of that is actually used, you have to cover it, and you can just release a little bit of your fry arc water. And I understand that's we're talking about really 1 acre foot a year or less is actually being used that way. Very small thing, but it's covered by the water rights. Okay, so then the basic water rights operation is every day you use the 1861 direct flow Manitou Waterworks pipeline. That's the workhorse water right. In many years, you just use that year-round. It covers every single thing. Manitou Reservoir is available as a backup supply if there's not enough water physically available on any particular period of time for the Manitou Waterworks pipeline. You just release water out of the reservoir, it flows down to your intake, you pick it up. The Fountain Creek Exchange I've talked about, and then the French Creek Exchange with Colorado Springs. Not really exchange, it's just more of an agreement, arrangement, is available as a backup. Okay, historical drought operations. The worst drought, I believe, that has been to date was in 2002. And in that year, they had to draw down the reservoir by about 210 acre feet to be providing enough water for the municipal system. And as I described a while ago, back in 2002, the water demand was substantially greater. It was 1,000 acre feet for the city. Now it is somewhat less. So if we had that 2002 drought again, maybe you wouldn't have to be releasing quite as much from the reservoir. But still, even then, they still had 500 acre-feet sitting in the reservoir. It was drawn down 8 feet. Another drought was in 2012, and they drew down the reservoir by about 40 acre-feet. What's that? 1.4 feet down, but there was still, the reservoir was basically almost still full. And since that 2002 drought, we now have the Manitou Springs now has that the ability to make use of the Fry Art project water. In 2002, that was not in place at all, and they did not have the agreement with Colorado Springs. So the future challenges, of course, are climate change droughts that are almost certainly going to be worse than they have been in the past. There could be wildfire in the French Creek drainage that causes terrible water quality problems, or I mean, who knows what bad things could happen, but that is a risk. Growth in your water demands, and then just basically your maintenance of the water system itself, just to keep everything working properly. Conclusions. As I said, your water rights are excellent. The reserve supplies are excellent, meaning the storage in Manitou Reservoir and the storage in Pueblo Reservoir overlapped with the Colorado Springs agreement. So if something happened to the French Creek diversion and Manitou Reservoir, and I'm thinking wildfire for that, you could operate exclusively under the Colorado Springs agreement for a long period of time, and you have the 250 acre-feet that's guaranteed, and if at Colorado Springs Utilities' discretion, they could continue on to provide even more and more by that cross connection. And you do have that 770 acre-feet of available water to fuel that swap available to you. On that, one last little detail that I kind of glossed over on the agreement with Colorado Springs, the rate at which they have agreed that they will deliver water to you is 3.2 cubic feet per second, which is just about, is a little greater than I figure your peak day demand is. So it is enough flow rate to meet your peak day demand through that crossover connection. And as I just said, I think you have resilience for droughts and emergencies through the storage and the Colorado Springs agreement. And you have extra capacity, great deal of extra capacity in your 1861 water right and in the storage that you have available. And with that, my next clicker was going to say questions. There it is. And before questions begin, I think probably this would be the appropriate time to introduce Julianne Wooldridge, or she maybe join me up here. Julianne is your water rights attorney, and I'll let her.
Yes, if you give us your full name and title, even though that seems redundant, please.
Sure. I'm Julianne Wooldridge. I work for the law firm of McDougall and Wooldridge. I am a water rights attorney that has been hired by the City of Manitou Springs to represent it in water rights matters. You may, if any of you have been around long enough, you may recognize the name of that firm, McDougall and Woldridge, which used to be McDougall, Woldridge, and Worley, represented the City of Manitou Springs in the past. My former partner, Sandy McDougall, represented the city, and he's deceased now. And Henry Worley was my law partner, and he represented the city too, and he's retired now.
Thank you. Are there any highlights that you'd like to call to our attention?
The only thing that I'd like to call to your attention is that I have been advised, and I'm aware, that the city has what are called conditional exchange rights. That means the water right is awarded to you before you've actually put that water to use, before you actually exercise the exchanges. And so every 6 years, you have what's called a diligence requirement, where you have to go back to the water court and prove to the water court either that you have exercised the exchange and make it absolute, or that you're still working diligently towards the completion of that, and when the water is available and you have your system up and running, you can and will exercise those exchange rights. And that diligence requirement is every 6 years until you actually make the water rights absolute. Your next diligence filing is November of 2025, and that I anticipate at that couple months prior to that time, we will need to be working on getting the application prepared. But that diligence filing is something that the city constantly needs to be aware of, because you should be diligently pursuing the completion of those exchanges and the exercise of them. I also understand you have a contract expiration for the City of Colorado Springs contract in 2024, and that you may need my assistance in negotiating that contract.
Very good, thank you. We had, just to say, I want to get a little bit of direction here. John, I saw you raised your hand, you've got a question. I think it would be nice if council could ask a few questions. I don't think we want to make this protracted. Council, does that seem like a decent idea? Maybe take 10, 15 minutes while we've got everybody here and we're focused? Okay. If there's no objection, then let's do a little bit of question and answer. We do have some other things we need to get to tonight, so I would say 10, 15 minutes in, we'll stop the questioning and we'll just have to write down any subsequent questions, and we'll channel those through Mr. Cheney and get answers back. So if that sounds reasonable. Mr. Shada.
Yes, Gary, I have a question for you. Let's just take the example of the .099 CFS that is in the Iron Springs water. Since all that water right now just runs right on through town, how is that accounted for in this very tedious accounting system?
It just flows by, so there's really direct flow water rights like that. If you're not using them, the water just goes right on by. And so, and the same thing applies to your 7 CFS, because you never really are fully using 7 CFS. It goes by.
Okay.
Nothing to account.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Council, other questions? Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, Jillian, I was just, if you would clarify the exchanges, you said we had to exercise them. I assume that Russ is accounting for all of that? And do we have, when you say exercise, that means use them, right?
Yes, that means you're actually exercising the exchange, wherein you are diverting water out of priority into Manitou Reservoir to either refill evaporative losses or refill after usage. And if you do that by exchange, which means you're exchanging your project water down in Pueblo Reservoir, that's exercising the exchange. It is a paper movement of
Right.
water.
And we do that adequately, that it won't be a problem. And I am assuming we do it adequately to continue to apply for it. And you mentioned it's currently conditional. At what point would it become absolute?
Once you actually exercise the exchange in incremental amounts, you would make those incremental amounts absolute. If you get a great day where you can, or month or year where you can exercise the exchange, you should, as much as physically possible within the limitations of your exchange decree. And then you go to the court and say, okay, here are the days we actually exercise the exchange and in the amounts, make those water rights absolute so we don't have to keep coming back every 6 years. It is very often done in incremental amounts, like you may make 1 acre foot of it absolute a year, and so you would, generally it's most cost efficient to wait till right around your diligence filing deadline, and you file an application to make absolute in part and for diligence on the rest.
Okay, so when might we become able to make them absolute? I don't have a good idea of, I mean, it seems like we'd want to make them absolute,
Yes,
and that would be permanent, correct?
yes. Well, not necessarily. You have to remember, water rights in Colorado can be declared abandoned if they're not used. But yes, absolute means you don't have to keep going back and proving that you're working towards the development of the water right. For purposes of how much you are actually exchanging and how that accounting is going, I don't know.
You know, and I can say that was the thing I didn't focus on. I know your accounting is being done very carefully and accurately by Ann Nichols, but I didn't focus on that.
Anne, do you mind addressing that?
And if you'd give us your name and title, please.
Sure. Ann Nichols, title. I'm a citizen of Manitou, 208 Pawnee Avenue. And I do volunteer to help with the water rights issues. And I actually currently do the exchange requests and accounting. And it depends on the opportunity. I mean, we could go years without being able to make the entire thing absolute because we have to have a place to put it. That means we owe the river enough water that we could actually do the exchange, and there has to be the opportunity in Fountain Creek. At the moment, I've been doing exchanges every week to the tune of about 0.64 CFS, so small amount, way under what would take us to the next element of making it absolute. So it's opportunity. Again, it may be a while before we have an opportunity to make more than we've actually made absolute. But it's not a problem. You can do diligence filings for a long time. So I hope that helps.
Great, yes, I think it does. Super. Mr. Bremner?
Yeah, as long as we're talking about water, I'd just like to make a placeholder here. Ruxton Creek, about close to 20 years ago, Colorado Springs was draining all the water out of Ruxton Creek. They took all the water. And they had an agreement to let the water go back into Ruxton Creek, which completely transformed the ecology of Ruxton Avenue when they took all the water out. There was an agreement, and I was just talking to my neighbor today, that agreement was for 20 years. So that agreement might be coming up pretty close. That's just a placeholder, so City Council is aware of it, that's all.
Good, thank you. Other questions or comments? Anyone? Okay, great. Well, this is a good opportunity. My head hurts, frankly. This is confusing. I mean, but no, I've learned a lot, so I hope the rest of you have learned more. But this is a thorny subject, and I think it's all close to our hearts. I sometimes hear the comment made that there'll be a day in Colorado when a gallon of water will be more expensive than a gallon of 12-year-old Scotch. I hope that day doesn't come, but it's something maybe to keep in mind. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. My pleasure.
Okay. And Jeff and Russ, thank you also. Okay. Council, the next item will be Carnegie Library update. We can take a break now, or we could go through with the library. That'll probably take, I think, about half an hour and then take a break. Anybody have any druthers? Take a break now? Okay, let's take a 15-minute break. Thank you.
Testing.
All right, if we could go ahead and get started again. If we could resume. All right, so our next order of business is a Carnegie Library update. We have Christine, if you would introduce your companion.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Christine Lowenberg. I'm the planning director for the city of Manitou Springs.
And I'm Eric Grebler-Eunice with Ratio Architects.
Great. Well, thank you for having us here tonight. Tonight we are bringing to you the 60-day update that is developed in coordination with the Preserve and Renew, our Carnegie Library Task Force and staff, as well as the architectural team. That was in your packet. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that one other key member of our team, Kimberly Sherwood, is here. Kimberly Sherwood is our recently hired Capital Campaign Counsel, and she has, as of today, we had our second official capital campaign planning meeting. In that will last for a number of weeks, in which we put together our funding strategy, identify how much we need to be thinking in terms of not just budget, but some of the key crossover or bridge funding issues we may encounter as this project moves closer to fruition. So a lot of important work that we're getting underway, and we look forward to one of our upcoming meetings whereas tonight is really focused on the design and the design process so that we can get closer to a single concept. Our next discussion, we anticipate, would be deeply diving into what is being discussed and what we will be doing within the capital campaign process. So I can't see if Kimberly raised her hand, but hopefully she did.
She did. She waved.
Okay, two thumbs
great.
up.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So with that, let's get started. In your city council packet, there were two major items. One was the update that was prepared by the Preserve and Renew, our Carnegie Library Task Force and staff, and that details the activities of staff and the volunteer task force. Secondly, there was an architectural presentation in there that provided in-depth information of the three concepts. Our goal tonight is to review with you the three concepts, emphasis on concepts, not final design, concepts, and the process that got us here tonight. So as we got into this, we had some key challenges to address. Of course, we had to address accessibility issues, which we discussed about a year ago, that there can be well over a dozen accessibility issues when it comes to libraries. A second was considering programmatic needs. So what are the needs in the community? What was learned in the process several years ago? And what has been gleaned through interviews with the Pikes Peak Library District, who operates our library for us. What does the community want, and what matters to them? And third, another key challenge that we had to figure out how to address has to do with building and fire codes. So the current structure's fire capacity is 19. And as many of you who've engaged with historical structures or even your own homes know, that any improvement that involves construction triggers the need to bring that building up to modern building and fire codes. So this capacity of 19, not even considering what needs to be done for minimal ADA access of, if we just wanted to talk about just an elevator, would not even hold a class of students from the elementary school across the street, which is 17 to 24 students in an average size. So we had key stakeholders and the community and partners to engage. So the task force continued their ward outreach meetings. That additional outreach is noted in the packet. If we have some time and you had any questions about that, Rob Dannon from the task force is here and happy to chat with you guys. So then in addressing the key challenges, Ratio was asked to provide up to 3 concepts for the community to discuss and consider. The process that we chose to employ is iterative, right? So that means that it builds upon itself. It builds upon itself from input from all members and stakeholders of the community. As we move through that with each stakeholder group, we asked them to consider and allow us to practice a keep, toss, and create process. So 3 questions of each design or each concept. What do we want to keep from it? What do we want to toss or eliminate from it? And finally, the fun part, what can we create from it? So with that, we then, Ratio and staff from the city, hosted a major community outreach event. We had approximately 55 members of the community attend that. The stakeholder and partner document has been updated as well in your packet. I want to note that a key partner and stakeholder is the Manitou Springs School District 14 in planning this. Following that meeting, the planning department continued to receive emails, phone calls, and walk-in meetings from members of the community. I had somebody just walk in as recently as yesterday morning who said, I want to talk to somebody about that Carnegie Library building. Walk me through this. What are we doing? And so we have spent a great deal of time engaging with folks from the community. So what was the key community feedback? It must feel like Manitou with an exclamation point. The existing Carnegie should be the prominent structure. Architectural styles should complement the Carnegie when considering the addition. Save as much park space as possible. We received a lot of feedback that they like the idea of a community and park space on a new roof space. And as we walk through these designs, we can talk a little bit more about that. It was important that it doesn't feel like the structure is monumental or overpowering to the original structure. And finally, explore opportunities to the south of the building. And for reference, that would be closer to the elementary school on the back side of the building. So we then incorporated that feedback and enhanced those concepts. It was important that we took those 3 concepts all the way through a true iterative community process, which is why you'll still see those 3 tonight, even if you heard, oh, option whatever was horrible and we shouldn't continue with it. We want to get all the way through that process. None of them were horrible. I just, wanted to say that. So then what we did as we were then on the road to incorporating that community input is then take it through what will ultimately be the approval process. So we informally took the 3 concepts to HPC, the Historic Preservation Commission, and then PARAB, and then now this body, City Council. So last week at HPC, we asked that body to consider the materials that were being presented as those were an enhancement of the original concepts. And the feedback from HPC was that it's a very special site, and the primary context should be the existing structure. The addition must be submissive to the existing structure. Minimize opportunities for the addition to hide the character or defining elements of the existing structure. And then 2 more that we heard from them very clearly. The addition should not be replicative, meaning it should not look exactly like the original structure. Rather, the architectural style should be complementary. And again, they also suggested that we explore opportunities that set the building further back or around to the rear. Then last night, we presented and had a very similar discussion with PARAB. And this is always an interesting discussion because, as you know from the history of Manitou Springs, that entire corner was acquired for the Carnegie Library. But the original forefathers and mothers of our community, the way in which they designed that is that they set the building further up so that that park could become in existence and utilized by the community. So the feedback from that group was to minimize hardscape and maximize the greenscape, minimize the overall impact on the park. And again, they also said that they would like for us to explore opportunities to set the addition further south or to the rear, if you will. So with that, we've received a substantial amount of input. And so we have begun working towards the next concept that incorporates the entire community's input. Through our discussion tonight, we are looking forward to gathering your input and having a good discussion about this, because what we hope is that the concept that we bring forward, the next version, is ultimately what we can move through the formal acceptance process with HPC for architectural considerations and PARAB for park use. So with that, what we'd like to do is to bring to life the packet that you have with sort of a three-dimensional fly-through or demonstration of the different concepts. So Eric is going to take over this part of the meeting and really facilitate some of this discussion as we move through it. And at any time, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but at any time, if you've got questions, feel free to let us know and to ask those as we move through.
Thank you, Christine. And yes, please do just speak out if you have any questions about these options as we're going through them. As Christine mentioned, we are partway through a really fun journey of collecting feedback and comments about where this project can go. And we've prepared three fairly different options to spark the conversation and really trying to get to the core of what opportunities does this addition have to enhance the library functionality and also enhance the park and provide additional community opportunities. So with that being said, you're probably familiar with this view from Manitou and Pawnee of the existing Carnegie Library up on the hill. The first design option, which I'll switch to here, and you just have to bear with a small load time here as I switch the options. The first option was inspired by the previous Thorpe design, and it's an addition to the west side of the building in a manner that is a two-story addition. It's complementary to the existing structure in its materiality as well as its coloration. The roof lines match, and its presence it feels as if it's a continuation of the existing structure, and it would feel very much at home adjacent to the existing structure. The positive feedback is that it fits into the site very well. Some of the comments, as Christine was mentioning earlier, some of the criticisms of it is that it feels a little monumental. Maybe it's a little overbearing on the site. Now, there's steps we can take with this option to reduce its feel on the site, but in general, it was included primarily because it was previously approved with the previous HPC process. And so as you continue around the structure, the existing north, south, and east elevations will remain completely unchanged. The new accessible entry to the building will be along the south edge of the building to where users will kind of be greeted by this bump out where the new accessible entry to the library would occur. And so I'm going to kind of run back down to Manitou Avenue and switch over to the second option. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in now.
I was just going to ask if we're allowed to ask questions or if you want us to wait till the end.
I think now would be a great time to ask questions if you have them about option one.
My question is, it seems like this drawing violates the HPC requirement that they've had for a long time, that the addition cannot look like it's replicating or matching or extending the existing building, and that's exactly what this does. How do you address that?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And that really is kind of at the heart of option one of how it would feel on the site. However, there's things we would do to further differentiate it from the existing structure when we begin to refine it. Things like altering the building elevation, adding steps to it, altering the roof lines to create some type of separation, perhaps different roof slopes. Also, having separate window details in the new versus the existing, which is kind of hard to see from this distance, but what you notice is the existing structure has this beautiful brickwork along the arched windows. Very hard to see from this distance away, but there's architectural details like that which would not be replicated on the new structure. Okay, if there's no other questions on option 1, I'm going to shift over to option 2. So with option 1 being getting the criticism of feeling too potentially monumental on the site, we wanted to kind of explore an option that differentiated the addition and really tried to minimize its impact on the existing Carnegie Library to allow the existing structure to really be the prominent element on the site. And the way we approached that was to have the majority of the library's addition on the ground floor kind of tucked and dug into the earth. The second story element is only a stair and an elevator to provide that accessibility for all the library staff and community users. Another really important community feedback piece that has influenced this design is the desire to really not take away from the park space. It's a very beloved space and very highly used space. And so what I'm going to do is kind of take you on a quick walk that's going to take us up to the addition, just to point out the fact that there's a flat roof over that first story, and that becomes a rooftop deck or rooftop garden. And the goal is for this rooftop to be activated in a manner that where the addition occurs, it's not taking away from the park, but actually creating a flat, accessible area for community users to congregate in. And so this rooftop deck can serve the library from outdoor reading spaces, and also, again, just try to provide additional opportunities for accessible park use that would overlook the community. So I'm going to run back down to Manitou Avenue here. But if anyone has any questions about option 2, please feel free to jump in. And I guess just to talk about some of the criticism that this option has received that would have to go into the refinement of it as we move forward. One of the main criticisms is kind of these straight, more modern-looking architectural features, and which is very understandable because it feels different than the existing Carnegie Library. The intent would be that if an option that's one story sunk into the earth achieves the prominence for the existing structure, we could then go back and look at the architectural detailing of the addition and find ways to take it to be a little more contemporary perhaps and less of that modern feel. So, I mean, I would say it's maybe fairly subjective, but the modern element could be something that's very sleek and maybe appears a little more industrial, or I feel like contemporary is a little more universal. It's something that could relate to a much broader array of architectural styles and be more of a mediator. And then so the last design option that we've been discussing and presenting with the community is one that was inspired by the center of the park. Just through site visits and seeing the topography that slopes down through the site, the center of the park is very clearly designated as an important spot. And I know it's used for music in the park and for sitting and watching the performers or musicians. But at the same time, it's also too sloped in a way that it's not necessarily accessible or usable by everyone. So what this last design option was exploring was the opportunity to have the addition be placed to the north of the existing Carnegie Library, treating or kind of acting as a pedestal for the existing library to sit upon and have its place above the addition. It's similar in architectural style to the second option. Again, it has that flat roof, which then can be activated for community events and have spill-out space for the lower level of the existing library. So it has really good library functionality as well as after-hours community use. Some of the main criticism from the HPC and why this option will most likely not be able to be moved forward is that the addition begins to cover up part of that north elevation in a way that masks character-defining elements of the historic structure. So from a site planning standpoint, it creates really exciting opportunities of activating the middle of the park as a flat, accessible space, but also as a historic component. It will not be able to move forward in its current state because of its masking of the existing structure. And so there's likely positives of each of these options and negatives of each of these options that we've been talking with the community groups, PARAB, HPC, and now this group, to where we really want to be able to wrap our hands around what the community truly feels that this library needs to become, and to refine these options in a way that ideally creates the most appropriate addition that satisfies as many of the needs as we possibly can. So with that being said, I thank you very much for your time and for allowing us to kind of create a 3D visualization of the plans that you've seen, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Hang on just a second. Mr. Shada.
Yes, I guess I'd like to hear kind of a clarification in terms of how the next steps will be proclamated in terms of, in other words, we've seen these three. Christine outlined the keep, toss, create. But I was wondering if, Christine or whoever would like to speak to this in terms of just what the next steps will be, and how some kind of synthesized, version will develop. Do you guys have a clear idea what the next steps are going to be, what that looks like, and explain that from a community participation standpoint?
So, go ahead, Christine. Okay. So after this meeting, this kind of marks a really important milestone where we're going to be able to take all of the feedback that we've gathered to date and begin to manipulate these three options in a way that tries to address all of the best components and to make sure we're celebrating the most exciting opportunities, as well as being able to go through each of these options and correcting anything that was detracting from the success of its potential. Because at the end of the day, we're going to be coming back and presenting three options for you all to choose from, I believe. And we want to make sure that each of those three options is really representative of what the community is wanting out of this project. And again, just to make sure that we could have the most appropriate project move forward.
Thank you. Other questions, council?
Just to recap, so did I hear you say that what's going to happen next is you're going to give us three different drawings that are a variation on what you're showing us tonight based on public feedback? Is that right?
Correct. So ultimately, we want to make sure that all of the comments and the feedback that have been given to us can be incorporated into each of the options. And working with Christine and the stakeholder groups, making sure that what gets presented for that final selection truly represents the community's desires.
Okay.
I would, if I could add to that. I
Okay,
would
go
add
ahead.
to that, we may see, as Eric mentioned a moment ago, that one of the options will not move forward. Like, we may know that. So our contract and our expectation was up to 3. And so by the time we come back to see you again, we may not have all 3. We'll keep them and we'll continue to move through the process. So what we'll do is we anticipate scheduling, once they have come back with incorporating all of the community and your input, then we anticipate scheduling another major community outreach opportunity for folks to have same kind of input. We will be engaging with our stakeholders, our partners, and through this then to get their specific feedback. And ultimately, yes, we would like to have one design selected, and that'll be in coordination with the capital campaign process, so that when we come back and you're ready to say, this is the one, we also have a fundraising strategy that we can talk about alongside that. Does that answer your question, hopefully?
Can you give me kind of estimated timeframes in terms of where these pieces, parts will be?
As quickly as possible. No, seriously. Next month is when we'll schedule the next community outreach meeting. Now, we have wanted to get through, we have not scheduled that yet because we wanted to get through HPC, PARAB, and this, all which has transpired in less than a week. So we wanted to see just how these conversations went and how much additional improvement we would need to do upon those designs. And so ideally, it'll be within 4 weeks. Maximally, it may be 5, 6, or 7. With a final design for consideration and hopefully approval by November.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Chandler?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that I attended the community meeting, and it was really an active meeting. I've gotten quite a bit of feedback since then and have had a number of discussions. And first of all, I want to give you some kudos, because one of the things I've been hearing is how happy the community is with the process. I've heard it's transparent. We feel like we're being heard. They may not be crazy about the design so far, but they understand the process and really appreciate the task force's work. So I just wanted to give you that. That said, the majority of the feedback that I'm getting, and I would say 90%, and it applies to all 3 of these designs, is that all 3 of them in their own way are a little too grandiose in scale for what we're trying to accomplish, which is to just really, preserve the uniqueness of the library, preserve the sledding hill, and to the best of our ability, preserve as many of the heritage trees in the park. There's also been some discussions with really focusing on the addition being on the Duclos side. That's not my grand idea, but I love it. So that if we can take, so my question to you is, how much leeway does the community have with really taking a few of these designs and really changing them such that the focus of the addition is in the back of the building, for example, which is not the current design concepts we're seeing?
Sure, I'll let Eric take that one.
Thank you. And I mean, that really is, I think, the essential question for the project is, how do we minimize the impact of this addition on this beautiful Carnegie Library? And, your point is, and the community's point is great. Why can't we move the addition to the south? Well, the reason we kind of started with these options was to give us maximum flexibility on the site. Well, we weren't sure about what the parking requirements or book drop-off were going to be for the project moving forward, so we wanted to make sure that south portion of the site was going to be remaining open. So if the decision was made, we wouldn't have to scrap the entire design process. Now, where we are is that that south space is going to remain open, and we're not going to have a drive-through. There's going to be an accessible parking space provided adjacent to the library, but now that's really valuable. It's a really valuable building location. And as Christine mentioned, that option 3, it's not going to be able to move forward from the HPC conversation alone. So we're really excited of using that third option as another opportunity to explore exactly what you're saying. Is we want to look at an option that starts to wrap around the south elevation. And also talking with the HPC, it was really valuable to hear that that south elevation wasn't as prominent as the north. The north is really, from their perspective, the key. And we, just from our initial studying of the building, kind of placed not as much weight on the south elevation as the north, but it still had that street presence. So now that we've kind of gotten the go ahead and the direction to, explore what the building could be, we're really excited to jump into that, and I think you should all expect to see what that pulled back option is going to look like.
Julie?
Thanks. Will any of your design redos reduce the footprint or reduce the square footage? Because that's what I'm hearing too. It's too big, it's too big. Why is it so big? But what I'm hearing from you is nothing about reducing the square footage. Is that something that you all would consider? Or what's happening with that?
So we've been directed to really create an addition that's going to serve this library for the next 100 years. And, a large part of that is providing the accessibility from the elevator, allowing staff to more easily carry books up and down, but also just to make sure that patrons are able to equally use both levels of that library space. So in terms of the actual library program, my understanding of that was derived through a fairly extensive process, which maybe Christine could touch on in more detail than me. But so, the program's kind of being derived from that initial Thorpe design, which was informed from this more extensive programmatic exploration of what this library needs to really serve as a Pikes Peak library.
I think, I don't mean to be arguing with you, but just as a statement, an observation, I think that's going to be the rub. You all have been tasked with doing something really nice and huge and to make the library district feel like it's the best thing they got going out of their whole collection. Whereas the citizens, at least what I'm hearing, similar to Judith, is I don't want it that big. I don't want it that big. So I think that's going to be an issue when you come back. That may be a reason we're not able to vote for either of the 2 or 3 new designs you're going to give us. But that is an issue.
Thank you. Natalie?
I have a quick question about the ADA parking space. I know last night at the pair meeting it came up as well as to whether or not that one space would be enough to accommodate the needs of the library. I know at the Art Center we're in the process of adding an additional one due to need, and so I know that we are operating under the code that we only need to provide one, but I'm not quite sure if that conversation is still open for discussion as well.
That conversation's definitely still open for discussion. And I didn't really necessarily talk through the site plans, but just to show you one, for example, the way the ADA parking is working is through this configuration of a pull-in and then a pull-out. And the way it's been designed currently with the one stall is to allow the existing path to remain. There's nothing stopping us from adding additional accessible stalls adjacent to this if that's deemed necessary. So we've designed it to have flexibility to continue that conversation.
Other questions, comments? Okay, Christine, let's see, I believe you just, this is basically an informational meeting, so the takeaway here is you're really not requesting any formal action from us. And again, it is basically an update. I think probably in the time we have left, maybe it'd be appropriate for you to introduce your capital campaign person. I mean, we've give her an opportunity to speak. I mean, she's been introduced. if you want to do that, or and talk a little bit about that. I think one of the things council sometimes worries about a lot is how does this going to get paid for?
Thank you. A little bit on the spot here. I imagine that you have many questions. So let me just see if I can kind of at least distill kind of the thinking for the campaign. Perhaps one of the most important distinctions is that the campaign is a part of the project. It is not the project. So it's just the funding device for the project. So we really want to make sure that the project itself has really been well thought out, well designed, obviously. And it's not just the building. So much of what we want to be talking about is really related to the community feedback that was expressed earlier, how this is a hub for the community. It is a central gathering place. It is a place for the people and the citizens and residents of Manitou Springs, and really embodying that. So we want to make sure that there's an intersection between sort of the practical building construction project and how the story then gets told about what's going to happen thereafter. Because the building is important, but what's really important is what takes place inside the building and what takes place on those grounds and how it really gets animated over time. And so as we're thinking about the design of the capital campaign, we really want to make sure that we can clarify for folks how this facility is actually going to enable this sense of placemaking and community engagement. And so as we're thinking about the campaign, we're right now looking at it in kind of two chunks. The first chunk is really inviting contributions and looking at those contributions in about 4 different buckets, if you will: corporations, foundations, individuals, and organizations. And then building a strategy for how those solicitations and pledge commitments will then be paid out. This is a little bit technical, but really just ensuring that there's maximum opportunity for inviting people to be as generous as possible in supporting the project. So we have not made any real decisions. We're just kind of putting the architecture, if you will, for the fundraising together as we speak. And I'll be back here, I think, probably in sync with the architecture folks to really talk about how we see kind of the intersection of the capital campaign or the fundraising and the project implementation itself, because there are going to be a lot of opportunities for not just this pre-community engagement, but continued community engagement in animating this project and bringing it to life through contributions, but also just through engaging people in the idea of the future of the library. So anything else you'd like me to touch on, Christine, or maybe questions for folks? Maybe just one more thing that I've heard is that it's maybe the first time that this community has ever done a community-based capital campaign. And so we're also bringing that into our thinking. I don't know if that is an accurate statement or not, but I'm not sure that it's not like a routine thing here that this community has done. So I think that there is a sensitivity to precedent setting and really establishing the right tone and tenor that really matches with the community's commitment to the legacy of the building, but also what's coming in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any comments or questions from council? Okay, so thank you. Christine, just a quick question. So there'll be another round of public engagement, and I think from the timeline shown in the council packet, we're looking at a 12 to 16 week time frame, so that would put us, I guess, about 4 months from now. We'll have an update in October and then one towards the end of the year. So I guess the expectation is we'll see things sort of taking form by the end of the year. Does that seem reasonable?
What we're hoping is that we're back here and asking for your a decision and key input on the capital campaign as well. So I will be coming back and asking for more time than just the task force's 20-minute or so update, so we could talk a little bit more through this. That would be later, yes, later in the year, and ideally later after budget season.
Right, understood. Council, any further questions, comments, concerns? I guess not. Well, thank you very much. Okay, thanks for the update.
Thank you for having us.
Great. Okay. Next item, it's an update on the Hiawatha Gardens. And I believe we have Dole and Susan Watkins for this. And Ann. Okay, great. Okay. Okay, you all have the floor. First, we'd ask that you each give us your full name and address, title, and we'll push on.
I'm Susan Watkins, 120 El Paso Boulevard, Manitou Springs. My title is Task Force Member for Hiawatha Gardens.
Ann Nichols, 208 Pawnee, and also a task force member.
Dole Grubenick, City Engineer for the City of Manitou Springs. Okay, well, we are excited to be here tonight. As everybody who lives in Manitou, which is all of you, have seen, there has been a lot of activity at Hiawatha Gardens. So this is kind of our efficient update for you. Feel free to ask questions as we go through it. We welcome them. Sorry, my facial hair pulls my mask on as I talk, so for some of you guys, you understand that. One day, we have our brief agenda there. Obviously, this rendering needs to be updated because part of that rendering no longer exists. Let me figure out how this mouse works.
There you go.
All right, sorry about that. Just wanted to remind everybody of council resolution. Sure thing. I'll just get a little closer and a little louder. Just wanted to remind everybody about council resolution 3120. There were 6 primary sections, and each of those sections we'll go through. First part, section 1, talks about investigating and implementing the restoration of historic aspects of Hiawatha Gardens with the goal to establish it for community use, including but not limited to a multimodal transportation hub. So we highlighted a couple of key elements there going through the presentation and kind of an update. We have made significant progress. The decision to retain and restore, there was a lot of debate, and that's really why we're here tonight, is kind of update everyone on the structural integrity of the existing dance floor. It had been looked at several times, but really until everything was kind of unstitched from it, there was some uncertainty about if the building would be able to stand alone on its own, or if those wings and other buildings kind of help serve as additional support. We've had our architect and his structural engineer come out and inspect the building last week. Their inspection happened the same day that the presentation is due to council, so this has all happened since then. But we can confidently say, and it'll be published when it's ready and reviewed by the task force, that building has been found. What's left of the building, the dance floor, has been found to be structurally sound. There's really no question whether or not that building is structurally sound at this point from our perspective. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay, I also wanted to point out that we've been very conservative with our funds, so we'll talk more about that. And then, can't see over the head there. Also, at the bottom of that slide, you can see that we left some question marks. Anticipated space of approximately a certain number of additional interim parking spaces, and then a question about if those parking spaces would be able to generate a certain amount of parking revenue. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Come on. All right, just to kind of give everybody a little brief synopsis of where we are today. So this is the site that most of you can see when you are driving on El Paso, looking south to Hiawatha. You can see the major excavation, and then you can see on the left side of that screen there, that is the east wing, and that was a part of some additional work. But basically what you're looking at now is the original footprint of the dance hall as it existed back in the day. You can kind of see to the left of that bucket, there is what's remaining of a Manitou greenstone. I don't know if it was a retaining wall or a structural element, but that's what you can see there, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And then to the left, the picture, when we originally started on this project, everything but the fluorescent green was what was designed and scheduled to be removed. As we got into the demolition and the contract, was written to kind of enable this, we realized that the smaller footprint of the building existed, which really was, and it lined up with the old stone columns and all kinds of coincidental elements. So what we have now is that smaller footprint in the green there where it's been hashed out. So whatever is not hashed out is what remains. Just some pictures of demolition. I took these, and especially I took a picture of the greenstone, and I wanted to highlight that all of the greenstone that we are impacting, we are harvesting and stockpiling and hauling it up to Public Works. I have never seen rock like this before. I've kind of heard of it. This is my first exposure to it, and I can see why it's so valuable because it's pretty amazing. So we have already hauled 2 tandem loads up. We probably have 2 more in the stockpile to be hauled up, and then there's additional Manitou greenstone retaining wall demolition needs to happen that we can then harvest additional stone out of. Okay, section 2, consideration of nomination for Hiawatha Gardens to be reinstated to the Historic District. And actually, Ian, would you mind hitting this one real quick?
I will. As I think you may recall, there is a specific code provision about how a property gets added back into the historic district that starts with a nomination from a variety of places. And we've been holding off soliciting that nomination, waiting until we got confirmation that the building was structurally sound. Now that we do, we expect there to be a nomination from a citizen of Manitou shortly that would start what can be as long as an 8-month process to go through HPC and City Council to get to the point where a final decision will be rendered about returning it to the historic district.
Thanks, Ann. To keep moving on, section 3 talks about discussions with the COG regarding the $500,000 that was outlined in the tax incentive agreement. We are in discussions and have asked the COG, and we are discussing that. We don't have a lot to report yet, but that conversation has started. Council Resolution 3120, Section 4, we talk about hiring a project manager, and I think there were days where I wish the city had. That's my joke. So I will it's probably too early for this, but the task force is very well represented in the community and is highly qualified and has really done a lot of the heavy lifting for this, which I'm very grateful for. Section 5, to investigate avenues to make Hiawatha Gardens self-sustaining. So this is still ongoing. There are some examples, Texas Dance Hall Preservation, where they're able to take some things and do some fundraising and keep those going. Depending upon the structural integrity of the building, the match funds were given assuming that the building would meet its structural integrity requirements. So there's a potential funding source. And then we have talked with the City of Manitou's events coordinator, and she comments that there is big demand for the room we're in right now because it really cannot be used during the week. And so that there's more demand out there for public use than there is that Manitou has space for right now. 6, I know this is pretty much impossible to read, but we just wanted to kind of highlight all the tasks, schedule, items, and elements that we've been working on. Every time we literally pick up a Manitou greenstone, we find something else underneath it that we now have to deal with. So we're working our way through it. We are in a good place now, and you can see many of the tasks that we've accomplished and still have it to work on. So, we have talked about that there will be an interim condition where this building is partially demolished. The future of the building has not yet been determined, and we have this empty space around the building. So I meant to do this last time I got to present to everyone, but I meant to introduce Emily. She is our new GIS tech. Hire. And turns out that she's pretty terrific. And I said, Emily, can we do a drawing with the new, smaller Hiawatha Gardens building footprint? And then let's do some parking layouts. And she said, how do we do parking layouts? And so we talked about doing certain standards with aisles, lane widths, lane angles, approach angles, direction patterns through there. And she went out one morning and counted some things. And so she drew this up. Basically, what's important from this to note is that if in this interim condition, with proper backfill, we think that we can gain about 33 new parking spots with the Hiawatha Gardens building remaining in place as it sits today. So that's 33 new spots, and of note, we think there's about 146 spots at Hiawatha, so that's about a 20% increase in parking spots. Also of interest for perspective is that that's about how many on-street parking spots there are on one side of downtown from like Pawnee to the Ruxton roundabout. So just kind of give you perspective about how many spots 33 represents. And then to continue the story and ask the question, well, what does it look like if we remove Hiawatha as a building from there and it turns into one parking lot? Then we would gain a total of 72 new spots as well. Okay, and then I'm going to hand it over to Susan.
Okay, community engagement is really a top priority of the task force. We haven't engaged the community directly lately because we've been doing lots of research to try to figure out what's going on with the building. But now that we know that the building is structurally sound and can move forward, we've set some goals. And one of the first one is we want the community to be able to develop judgment, informed judgment about that building and its potential future. And for people to develop judgment, they need two things. They need factual information, and they need the ability to hear from other people and to hear other perspectives. So the methods we're going to use for community engagement really stress the ability for those two things: fact gathering, getting facts, hearing from your neighbors. We want to make sure also that community preferences are reflected in the recommendations that are forwarded by the task force. So we will actively gather community ideas and concerns about the building design and use. It's important to communicate why the task force will be recommending whatever its recommendations will be. And by encouraging everybody who's interested in this property and its potential use to get involved and to help influence the decisions that are going to be made, people will be able to understand the recommendations and why they're made. So to achieve these goals, we're going to be focusing on 2 community engagement methods in the near future. The first are building tours, guided building tours. Once the building is safe to enter, all the dirt is gone and everything's all tidied up, we're hoping in September we can start building tours. And this is really an information exchange between the city, the task force, and the community. We want to get people in there, in the building, to have guided tours by structural experts, historic experts, so that people can see firsthand what that building is all about. I think, as with any project, any old structure, there are lots of misconceptions probably, and we think it's important for people to see firsthand that building. So we want to do it on multiple days and have like guided tours every 15 minutes and have anybody come who wants to come. Everybody's welcome. And we'll also gather community responses during the building tours. So those are planned for September. We encourage you to help us encourage people to participate, and we'll get you more information when they're scheduled. We're going to have to kind of juggle with the events going on in Memorial Park, but we'll find days to do those building tours. The second method that we want to use to engage people are community roundtables, and these will likely be held late this fall. And the purpose of these is to give people information about the building and the uses, potential uses, the costs, and other implications so that people have the facts. We want to give people the opportunity to share their ideas and concerns and hear the concerns and ideas of their neighbors. We want to solicit responses on design and use options. We don't know yet how many options there are going to be, but if there are options, we want to hear what people prefer. And then finally, we want to document the range of thinking about the use of Hiawatha Garden in the Manitou Springs community. We are anticipating having 4 to 6 community roundtables of about 12 to 15 people. Everybody's welcome. We'll have people sign up, first come, first served. They will be professionally facilitated and responses gathered and disseminated. Communication is really an important piece of this. The task force is committed to a transparent process. We have done some community information efforts. We will be doing a lot more now that we have more information. Now that we know that the building is sound, we'll be communicating to the community about how and why the assessment was conducted and what the results were. We also, following the tours, will report back to the community on how many people came, what they told us, what happens with what they tell us. So there will be a continual feedback loop every time we engage the community. So what the community tells us won't just fall into a black hole. It will be reported back out to the community. So everything is transparent. And then finally, as the building design options become more clear, we will engage people, as I said, through the community route workshops. And we will report the results of those, summary of responses, so that everybody knows the range of thinking that we heard. And then finally, in close coordination with the city staff, we will communicate broadly to the community what the recommendation is of the task force and why the task force has made that recommendation. So you'll be hearing a lot more about Hiawatha Gardens in the community in the coming weeks. We have a dedicated project web page. Alex has been great about getting information on there and keeping things updated. We also welcome community comments. People can email us comments at the address you see on the slide. We love to hear what people are thinking. That'll help us.
Also, just a brief kind of update of what's happened thus far out on site to kind of help with improve the landscaping and clean up some of the visualness. You can see that this volunteers cleaned up a bunch of trash in June. The city gardener and a volunteer weeded and mulched, which just really improved the visual appearance there along Old Man's Trail. And then we are working on salvaging some of the existing old fencing that we had at Public Works to repurpose it here at Hiawatha Gardens in the meantime. And then lastly, the City Parks Director is developing an RFP to try to help do some landscaping improvements along El Paso Boulevard as well. Before I hit the conclusion, I kind of skipped over my Post-it note. We put on there to go over the budget for the project. And the budget was we were updating and managing and changing before we could get this published. But as of now, we have about $20,000 left in our allocation for the project. But that is factoring in about $30,000 of allocation that was built into the contract that is available. So because there were a few unknowns during the RFP that we basically put in placeholders that we said, hey, we don't really know what's going to happen when this occurs, so we want to put money as a placeholder. And we have 30,000 of that money left. So worst case scenario, we use some of that up and we have $20,000 off in the project. Best case scenario is things just continue going well, we would have up to about $50,000 left in the project. So conclusion, when we reference the course change, we talk about that we are doing partial demolition and then also did the wings on the east and west side and the south side near the creek. And we talked about parking spaces, we talked about landscape, we talked about the match funds. A design RFP has been published. We published it Thursday of last week, which is soliciting architectural services for someone with restoration skills and abilities and I'm going to say 3D rendering abilities, because that's really, I found that very visually helpful to understand how a space can be utilized. And so that is going to be out for 3 weeks, and we are actually having a non-mandatory pre-bid meeting for those consultants tomorrow morning, so they can come and get a tour from me of the building. They can see it, then get a feel for it, get a sense of the site, the layout, all those things. So when they're putting together their proposals, they kind of know what we're dealing with. And as it says here, and as you're hopefully getting, the project has a whole lot of momentum right now. Questions?
Natalie?
A weird question. What would you say the size of this room is? I'm just trying to figure out how large. Does anyone have an idea?
We had that information at one point, but I can't remember it.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it's integral to the conversation tonight. I'm trying to.
I think this space is larger than the dance hall. No, it's not? Okay.
Yeah, and one of the things about this
Shouldn't
space
speculate.
is when we talk to the event coordinator, that the space behind the columns really doesn't get used. So it's kind of more of like an ineffective. And I'd have to look at the numbers. We do have it because it has been discussed in comparison. And I feel like, I don't want to go on record as saying, but I guess I would have to. I feel like the Hiawatha space is bigger.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Apparently not. Okay. Any staff comments, Denise? Okay. All right, great. Well, very good. Thank you for the presentation, the update. Okay. So the next item is a discussion of COVID, the current status. And I think we have several people here to present their perspectives on it. We have Elizabeth from the school district and Leslie from the chamber. And I think, Denise, did you have a comment first?
Could we just take a 5 minutes break? I know Bill Otto's coming in and so is Kelly, and I've been texting him, but could we just take a 5-minute break for them to get in?
Sure,
Is
that sounds,
okay?
no objections, council? Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. We need to buy a different mouse because this mouse is too complex. We had it somewhere, but I can't remember the size. Did Jeff Jones? I don't know. I was looking at Jeff said that.
Speaking of my street, I did have a conversation with Christine. I want to see the permitted the traffic plan for the townhomes because they've got an excavator sitting in the street unattended. Yes, they do, in a big hole.
We saw that today.
Yep.
And I said, hope
Yeah.
have a permit for all this stuff.
Yeah.
They're digging up the whole road.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they've put some cones around, but they've got more than one side of the street. My concern is, well, they need to be permitted, and they also have to have a traffic plan, but there's a big hole there now, right? And it's dark and there's no lighting.
So they didn't set anything.
No tape, no
Safety?
nothing. I think there were like 5 cones around the excavator. But the excavator's sitting in the street unattended.
How dark is it?
Dark. I mean, there's no
Flashing?
nothing. Well, as of
Oh,
when
it
I
is
came
7.
here, as of when I came here. But I mean, that's a deep hole. So an animal could fall in it, a person could fall in it, a car could, you know, if someone were, you know, let's just say under the influence driving down the street, that never happens. Could end up in it.
Well, and they drive fast, because we noticed a couple when we were up.
So it's a real big safety concern, and I know that, you know. But.
Let me text Jeff, because we saw it earlier today.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Beckers, the townhomes are digging up the road there.
They've got a whole.
I told Jeff, I hope they have a permit.
Sign.
They have a permit.
Oh, I
Do that.
want to see the permit, I want to see the permit, and I want to see the traffic plan, because they need the traffic excavator. They left it there in the street. When they
There's a
left it
hole?
there.
Do you have a picture?
There is a hole, I can get to it on the way home. Did you take a picture? Because I
We saw it already.
running, I mean,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, and you need to put Christine on that because they have to have a permit from Christine.
And the traffic plan.
Or it goes through public works. Some things go through public works.
Well, Ronnie was over there today,
I don't know what they're doing, but it could be a public works.
Okay.
but,
I was there yesterday and it wasn't there, but today it just happened.
they dug, they dug up the whole.
Are they doing, are they doing the taps?
Yep.
So they're doing the 2 taps.
Yeah, and for a while we had no water. And I'm okay, I'm
So it's the
used to
tap
it.
fees.
Yeah, so they're kind of, Ronnie had some concerns actually, he was saying, God, they should have done it a different way, but, you know, that's from here and there. But I'm concerned from a safety standpoint because we don't have a lot of little kids. We have a lot of deer, we have a lot of wildlife. I mean, anything is a number of things. But also want to, you know, hold feet to the fire where we need to be, you know, held to the fire too. So anyway, it
Well, yeah, Jeff and I both saw it, and I said, I hope they have a permit, and Jeff said they should, and then we were there measuring, so I assume, we went back and checked or whatever, I don't know that,
Well,
so I'm finding out.
I was kind of surprised that they didn't take it off, and I was surprised they just left the excavator in the street. And then everybody left for the day, and it's still sitting there, so.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, if they did, and I believe that Public Works has said. Public Works.
I know, Public Works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes me nervous. I was really feeling good about things, like, okay, we got through this, we've recovered, but if we have to lock things back down again, then.
Well, the school districts are going to be interesting too. We just got that they're recommending a mask again at school, highly recommending. But we'll see, it's going to be, as you know, with kids, it's tough.
I know.
It is so hard. So, it's a very tough time.
What do you do?
Yeah.
All right, well, see y'all tomorrow. Here's
You won't see me tomorrow.
here's Memorial.
So what's the square footage?
It's 70 foot, 8 inches by 58 and 10 inches. Oh, wait, there's another section.
70 foot.
Looks like there's 75, is that the stage? So this part's is 58, 10 inches
Plus
by
10, so 68-ish minus that corner there.
Yeah, so you get like 5 estimates.
So what's a rough estimate?
Okay, so a rough estimate is like 4,500 square feet.
And what do you think
Seven.
Hiawatha is?
It's like, let's say 6,500.
So it's,
So it's
Hiawatha
65.
is 65?
And then Memorial's like 4,500.
Okay, we'll just say that real
Yeah.
quick.
45.
It's about a third bigger, basically.
Hiawatha is 65 there.
50% bigger.
45.
Not quite 50, 45 and 65. Not quite.
50% bigger, it's almost, it's
Yeah,
half of
because
that.
of half of that, you're right. I figured it was bigger, but I just.
Yeah. It's hard because like it's hard to see the space where it is. Like to sit back and be like, okay.
Yeah, I talked to him today.
Thank you. So we'll begin with our COVID discussion here in just a second. But to answer Counselor Johnson's question, this room is approximately 60 by 70 feet. 60 from that wall to right by the double door, and then from the back of the stage to the kitchen walls, just under 70 feet. So about 4,200 square feet. I think the
Hiawatha is, yeah,
40
6,500 is what Dole just told us, so it's about 4,500 to 6,500.
Okay, all right, so about half again as much. So, quick answer. Okay, great. So now our last discussion item is COVID, the scourge of modern world. So Denise.
Yeah, so I put together the memo, and it's pretty minimal for what we sent out, because you guys asked for discussion. So what I asked tonight is if Elizabeth could come up from the school district to talk about what they're doing, and then Leslie to give a perspective of what the businesses are discussing. And then I just sent out to you tonight that I got at about 6:08 or so. I forwarded it to you from the county health, the latest updates there. And so I will, and then I have received information from other cities of what they're doing on my listserv, and I can share that with you after this. So first we'll have Elizabeth, and then Leslie, and then I also have the police chief here and Kelly here from our HR department. So Leslie, do you want to come up also, and we'll have each one of you talk and then go from there. So Elizabeth?
And Elizabeth, if you'd start off and give us your full name and title, please.
Sure, Elizabeth Domingue, and I am the superintendent of Manitou Springs School District.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us tonight, having me tonight. I know that these decisions and these conversations are so connected, And we just have really appreciated being partners with the city and knowing that our decisions impact the community that we serve, and that we're really trying to protect and make sure that we're doing the best we can. So just first and foremost, just very thankful for that partnership. Feel like I can reach out to folks and share what's going on and what's on our mind. Denise has been an exceptional partner with us. I can the same, pick up the phone and say, here's some things that we're wrestling through. And she's always open and willing to have those conversations. Just wanted to share that, we're kicking off our school start August 20th. We're excited about that. I don't think any of us were hoping or wanting to be here in this conversation when we saw things going in the right direction in June. And so we have been preparing all summer long for a strong start. And our new staff came back today, excited and ready to step into these new roles in our wonderful school district. With that, we are also communicating our COVID protocols and understand too, as they always have been, that it may be one thing one day and we have to be prepared for the next thing the next day. And so that's been our messaging and our understanding that we're ready to make that pivot if we have to. And with our Board of Education, just always keeping them updated in our updates, making sure that they are aware of where we are, what school districts in the area are also doing, because a lot of the conversations that I have with our superintendents in the region are always in connection with our El Paso County Public Health Department. We meet with those folks often, regularly. They are willing to answer emails. Jenny Best with the County Health Department, I'll ask her, what are our current vaccination rates for Manitou Springs, Cascade, Chipeta Park, and they will get those data points to us very quickly. And then I oftentimes share that with Denise or Leslie, Natalie through the MAC, and just make sure that we all have the same information. Our vaccination rates as a school community are high for our staff. At the end of last year, we were sitting at about 85 to 87%, much higher than most school districts. And so we're really thankful for that. That allowed us to not have to have as many quarantines as we started moving through the end of this last semester. So I say all that to say that we are being very diligent and thoughtful in our planning. We are always going to be promoting first lines of safety is really remain home if you're sick. When we saw any type of impact, it was in the time when someone might have come to school or work sick, maybe just thinking it was allergies or something like that. But that's going to be really important messaging. We know we worked with Alex and others to kind of promote that messaging. I think it'll be really important for us to bring back those type of PR campaigns as we kick off and launch. And so we show that united front and saying this is community wellness that we are really focusing on. We implement something called the COVID intake form, and we saw that to have a high level of efficacy as we were managing when someone was sick. And so if they stayed home and they were sick, they completed this COVID intake form. That then got pushed to our contact tracer, and that was never never have I thought we'd have to have a contact tracer in the school district, but that was a pivot point for us that really gave us some high leverage in terms of making sure we were mitigating impact. So that contact tracer, she did a remarkable job last year. We're going to be bringing that person back or that role back because it was so critical for us to know, all right, if this child or this staff member was sick, then we're going to monitor those symptoms for 24 hours. If they resolve, great, then come back to school. If they don't, then we're going to need a test before we can have that person return, and that might mean a quarantine. The health department from Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment has changed their quarantine expectations. And so what that allows for us to do, for example, in some cases where there might be a positive in the space, that you may not have to quarantine everybody depending on if they were vaccinated and or if they had COVID in the last 90 days and some other circumstances with mask wearing and distancing. So we have done a good job of understanding and learning. What we know now is not the same thing that we knew back in August. And so we've constantly revised and refined our processes. Perfect, no, because it's always evolving and we're always going to be learning. So I just shared that with you because that COVID intake form, contact tracing is going to be very important for us. And then we are always listening to our local health department. And, you know, when the mask mandates were removed from schools, then the governor said, you know, that's going to be at the local health department. And so that's why those frequent and often meetings with our health department are very important. And we ask questions, you know, where's the point where potentially is there a mandate? And they will notify us when we're getting to that place or when it might be there. So that's the partnership that we have. We feel confident in those relationships. And I often say that this could change tomorrow. It could change Friday. So we just need to be prepared for that. But also an impact factor for us is CHASA, so sports and athletics. A lot of the decisions are connected there. And, you know, our health department is highly recommending mask wearing, and that's also the same messaging that we are going to have. We had it tonight. Our middle school had a parent university, very well attended, and that was the messaging that we're going to be modeling what mask wearing, especially when you can't social distance inside, and we're just going to promote it as a really important strategy for preventing transmission in schools. And so the last thing I'll say is that targeted quarantine is very important. Thank you to Alex and others in this room have helped us with vaccination clinics. We're going to have another one August 19th at our high school, and then we're planning another one. We always open those to our community, so parents, anyone who wants to attend those are welcome to. This one's going to have, I think, both Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, so just as a heads up. But we'll get that information to Alex so that it can be shared globally. And we live in a beautiful place, and we're really encouraging our staff to do more outdoor learning, especially while the weather is really not freezing and snowy. So I just wanted to share it with you all, some of the proactive ways that we're preparing and getting geared up for the start of the school year. We know there are questions and, you know, what's going on, but we're going to address those. We're hosting a parent and community virtual meeting tomorrow night so that I can hear and we can hear and say, you know, we are promoting, strongly recommending mask wearing. But first and foremost, please stay home if you're sick, because that's going to be very important. So I don't know if you have any questions for me, but just appreciate the opportunity and the partnership that we have with the city. I think it's really special and unique, and I'm thankful for it.
Good, thank you. Council, questions for Elizabeth? Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, thank you for that summary. That was great. Do you have any other like predetermined thresholds that you have established or plan to establish, for instance, to mandatory mask wearing, or, you know, when immunizations might be required, under what conditions and so, but predetermined so that you can immediately implement and folks know that they might be coming if such and such happens?
Yeah, you know, we haven't as even I'd say the health department through last year when those changes would happen. You know, it's so specific even to grade levels, where you think about our middle school and high school students are of age to have vaccination, where our elementary aren't. And so there's a lot of different variables. Also, many of our high school students have been vaccinated. So there isn't a specific, but I would say that we're going to constantly assess. I'll bring the data back to our Board of Education. We have a meeting on the 16th, and we'll constantly see where we are. If we need to make a change, we'll do that, but really monitoring these preventative and proactive measures of staying home, the COVID intake form, mask wearing, vaccination, those are our first lines. And so I would say if we see something changing, then we'll make that adjustment. Thank you for that question.
Anyone else for Elizabeth? Councilor Chandler?
Thank you for your presentation. I know this is a really hard topic. I'm just going to come out and say it. It's the nurse in me. I strongly recommend that everyone wear a mask indoors, including our teachers and our staff. It's what the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention are recommending, and it's what the American Academy of Pediatrics is recommending. And I just have to say how I feel about that. I you know, with the stats, you know, I'm looking at the 7-day incident rate has increased from 76 to 141 cases in the past week. So I just have to put it out there that I feel very strongly about that. We all know that most of the new cases, the vast majority of the new cases are the Delta variant. We're now seeing, we don't know what's going to happen with the Lambda variant, and now we have the Delta Plus variant. So we know that vaccinated people can transmit, and so just have to put it out there that I'm highly concerned.
Thank you. We'll continue to reinforce the highly recommended and make sure we're making those statements really public and modeling that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else, council? I guess not. Okay, thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
And Leslie, if you could give us your name and title.
Leslie Lewis, Manitou Springs Chamber of Commerce, Visitors Bureau and Office of Economic Development Executive Director. So thank you also for having me come in tonight. In the last couple of days, I've either heard from through email or spoken to 51 businesses. And out of that number, 3 require masks. 5 of them are thinking about adding that requirement, but they really don't want to deal with the anger of the people that they saw last year when they required, but other places had dropped the requirements, the mandates. And then 7 businesses require their staff to wear masks, but not their customers. And then 36 have no requirements. Although one did call me today and ask me to create a sign for them that says masks recommended. So we've done that for them. So, unfortunately, the attitudes are as varied as the businesses. But I think the overwhelming is we will do whatever it takes to stay open.
Okay, thank you. Council, questions or comments for Leslie? Steve?
Do you have the impression that the businesses would like a mandate from the city?
I think a few of them would. I think several of them said that they were adamantly against going back to masking. Many of them said all of our employees are vaccinated, so we leave it up to them. They can still wear masks if they want to, but because they're vaccinated, we're not requiring it. Several of them said we only require non-vaccinated people to come in. But again, I think it's whatever. Several of them did say it's easier if there's a mandate in place, but then without a mandate 2 miles down the street, that makes it more difficult on them. Like in old Colorado City, if they're not mandating masks down there and they come into town and they say, well, you have to wear one here, then people sometimes get rude. Sadly, rude.
Mayor Pro Tem, did you have a question? Oh, okay, sorry. Anyone else for Leslie? Councilor Chandler?
So I just want to have us all in this room ask ourselves, how did we get here where we're wearing masks again, right? And we all know how we got here. We got here because a large swath of the population didn't get vaccinated. We don't have to show proof of vaccination. So here we are with a variant that is, some scientists are saying, up to 1,000 times more virulent than the SARS-CoV-2 original virus. And I've been a nurse through a couple of these. I just, if we have some businesses, I would like to know from you how many businesses would feel more comfortable with a mask mandate. I think that would be helpful information. And then I think that the city really needs to think about having some triggers. I mean, what's it going to take? 200 more cases a week? I mean, we're at 141. 100 is the cutoff, people, for being in the high-risk red zone. 100 cases per 100,000 in the population. And we had a 7-day incidence of 141. So while I feel just terrible that there are some people who might be angry, our job here on council, my job, is a very serious one, and I take it very seriously, and it is preserving the health and welfare of our citizens and students and visitors. So I just can't emphasize that enough. But I would like that information. Thank you.
I will go back through my emails and look at my notes from talking to people, and I will provide those numbers. The sign that we created today for the business that requested it says, "For the safety of our staff and others," or "for the safety of yourself and others, we recommend you wear a mask." So I think that's easy enough to do for everybody, but definitely I'll find out how many are really looking for, unfortunately, you to be the heavy and put that mandate in place.
Leslie, could you put that out in a very specific survey so you have, because some of them may not have responded to that, but I think a very specific survey, how many would you, so that really gives them good data.
Absolutely, and I will also reach out to the others. As I said, I heard from 51. There's still, 50 plus that I did not hear from. So I would reach out to those too, just to have those definite answers all the way around.
Thank you. Mr. Bremner?
Yeah, I think it's important to get their feedback on where their position is on that. However, we in city council are in a position of leadership. So we need to lead. And I think that's what's called for in the situation with the spiking right now of the various variants. And, we've seen it before. Once it starts spiking, it goes up exponentially. And that's where we are right now. We're at the beginning or halfway up the curve. So it's time, I think, to act.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. Leslie, I know in the restaurant business anyway, it's been very difficult to hire people, or that's what I've been reading. Am I
Every industry is.
Every industry. Okay.
Industry is
So my
hurting.
question is, do we have any sense why people are not coming back? I have heard nationally different things. One is that people aren't coming back because they're getting paid a stipend. But more recently, I'm hearing that the reason people aren't coming back is because they're scared of COVID. That's one of the big reasons. So I would like to hear from the businesses if they have a sense if that is in fact one of the reasons why folks are not, here we are in a tourist town with people from all over the country, a lot of visitors from states that have very low immunization rates. And if there's any way to assess if that's one of the reasons why people are having difficulty in hiring employees.
The ones who have mentioned anything about it have always talked about the additional funds that they're getting, and that it'll be interesting to see what happens in September when that additional funding gets cut off.
Thank you. Julie, did you have a comment or a question?
I think this should be put on the agenda so that we can vote up or down one way or the other at our next meeting on whether we want to impose a mandate or some variation of that. Can we have that on the agenda next week?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's scheduled on the next 3 meetings because this is such a dynamic problem that we thought that it should be there just as a placeholder so that, if we have it on the agenda and we, for some reason, decided we didn't need to talk about it, well, we can just move on. But other than that, we've got it blocked out, so yes, we can address it.
Thank
as
you.
we feel appropriate at the time.
Thank you.
Mayor, may I make a correction? I sent something out today with the upcoming agenda items, and I did not have COVID on the next 3, so that was my error. It was just monthly, so I'll make sure I do that. So I apologize. If you see that, you'll go, why wasn't it? That was my mistake. Thank you.
Yeah, but you can see the intent because this is so dynamic. And I think back with a certain bittersweet quality. On May 11th, we had our hour-long presentation from the El Paso County Health. The metrics they gave us were enough to convince us just to stay with what we had, our existing mask mandate. 2 days later, CDC changed it. The day after that, the state changed it. We kind of had the carpet pulled out from underneath us. So it does obviously change quickly. Great. Well, thank you. If council has no more questions for Elizabeth or Leslie at this time, then I would ask that Chief Otto and Kelly Padilla from HR give us their perspectives.
Mayor, can I just give perspectives on what's happening with other cities real quick, what I heard?
Yeah,
So that
please.
you have that.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I didn't get a lot of feedback. It was put on the manager listserv for all city managers, and there were some, so it's definitely being discussed. Commerce City is implementing a mask mandate for facilities, for all city facilities, which is what we did last week. As you know, that started Monday. Crested Butte is also doing the same thing for all staff offices, meeting rooms, break rooms, and indoor work facilities. Idaho Springs is going back to virtual meetings, and they are also requiring masks in public buildings like we did. Fountain is not doing anything. They're going to follow El Paso County's health department. And Gibson did not really specify. They just said, follow your health department. So that's the information that I have as of to date.
Thank you. All right. Oh, yes, please.
Oh, did you happen to ask those cities whether they're mandating that the masks be worn in their businesses within the city limits?
It did not, it just said, what are you doing? I didn't ask, it was another manager that asked it, so I just pulled it all off, it came out. And all of them right now is not mandating in the entire city limits, they're just doing government buildings. That could change, right, very quickly, but that's where they are right now.
Any other questions for Denise at this point? Okay. If not, let's go ahead. Why don't we go ladies first? So Kelly, let's have your perspective, please.
Good evening. So based on the data that we're looking at, you've heard already that the city, Denise Howell had mandated starting Monday, effective Monday, masks were required in all city buildings and vehicles with one or more people in the vehicle, or two or more in the vehicle. So with all the information that we've looked up, right now, I don't know if I want to repeat all these rates. It sounds like everybody's pretty familiar with that we're up to 172 hospitalizations and vaccination rates only about 62.6% in El Paso County. The state of Colorado vaccination rate is about 70%. But the Delta variant's about 95.5% of all the new cases, and we understand that that's a pretty strong variant. Understanding that, there's not been one issue with employees with the masks. It has been very well receptive. I think that they understand that we need to be preventative and proactive, and we also need to be leaders in the community and show that we are taking the steps to keep people safe. A little bit more information that I got today, I wanted to talk to you that there's several places that are starting the vaccine mandates, but that's not where I would recommend that we go yet. I think that we have to play this a little bit slower and make sure that we're watching what's going on with other organizations. I know that the federal government is moving more towards that direction. But as I read the EEOC, an example of part of the EEOC is that an employee who doesn't get vaccinated, they can have a reasonable accommodation. It could be religious, it could be health related, or whatever falls under those two venues. So they said that you can get a reasonable accommodation if it doesn't pose an undue hardship to the organization. And since a reasonable accommodation is basically for an unvaccinated person to wear a mask, work a social distance, work remotely, and those are accommodations that we can make without a problem. We have in the past, and it's worked fine, and they do provide the prevention that we're looking for at this point. So I would recommend that we stay with the mask mandate for the city employees. As far as your community, of course, I would recommend everybody in the community wear a mask. That would be the ultimate. But as far as the employees here, I definitely believe that we need to maintain this mask mandate.
Thank you. Denise?
Can I just mention, we're also doing the same thing that the school district is doing with COVID tracing and all of that, if we, and telling everybody to stay home if they feel ill, report that, and HR department is managing that. So we are following the same protocol that we did before. We have not done the COVID intake form, but we will be implementing that also every day, which we did previously.
Okay, thank you. Council, questions for Kelly or Denise? Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, thanks. Kelly, what are the rules in terms of asking employees or requiring employees to tell you what or prove their immunization status? Are we allowed to do that or not?
Yes, we have been given the authorization. The federal government has come down and said it's not against HIPAA.
Okay.
And we have every right to ask.
Okay, and then can we, if folks are not immunized, can we require them to be tested?
We can make a policy. What we would need to do is make a COVID policy, and just so that we make sure that we're not discriminating against anyone in any form. So we would make a policy as far as if you're not vaccinated, what the steps would be. You have to wear a mask, you have to get tested, et cetera. So we would have to create the policy, and there are some sample policies out there that I've looked at, but I think it just depends on what's best for this organization, but that is something definitely we can look into.
Anyone else? Questions for Kelly? I guess not. Thank you. Chief Otto, what are your thoughts?
As far as enforcing the police, what we're going to do is what we did earlier this year when the mask mandate was in effect for all of Manitou Springs. The police will respond to a call for service in a business. And usually what happens is there is a call, somebody's upset because somebody's not wearing a mask in their store, their business. They're asking these people not complying with the mask mandate to leave. If they decide they don't want to honor that and leave, that's when we will come out and we will address the secondary reason for the call. Actually, it would be the primary, because as far as the mask mandates, we have nothing we can do with that on the police side of it, just in that by itself. There has to be an underlying reason that comes up secondary, a trespassing or some type of other violation of CRS or ordinance. So we will respond to those and take care of those as needed. And that goes for as public transportation as well, the buses that come through here. We will respond to those, and more than likely, unless there's some type of physical altercation, harassment type thing, it's going to be a trespass, which nowadays, especially a misdemeanor, it always has been, it's simply a ticket. Our officers will cite tickets for that, but not for not wearing a mask. Like I said, it's no change from what we did before. We just don't have a lot of teeth when it comes to the masks themselves, enforcing that. I know everybody was out last summer, not last summer, earlier this year when we had people walking up and down the streets. It's very tough to do anything when there's so many people not going by the rules and wearing masks. We don't have enough officers in this state to stop every person not wearing a mask and deal with that. So we have to go with that secondary offense. It has to be a criminal offense, a violation of ordinance, and then we will deal with that.
Good, thank you. Council, questions for the chief or comments? Steve?
I just have a comment. I think that's a very good approach. I don't think we need to go out there and arrest people for not wearing a mask. I think there'll be enough compliance just from making it, that's what the rules are. And we'll probably get 90, 95% compliance. I think that's satisfactory.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, during the last year, we basically ran with that policy that if a store wanted to enforce, stringent mask policy and a prospective customer didn't want to comply with that, then the store owner or the business owner had the you had the ability to call the police and ask to have that person taken out. So it really became a trespass issue, and it put really the decision-making in the hands of the business owner. So that seemed to work. In my mind, that worked reasonably well, probably as well as anything that we might be able to implement. Obviously, it's a difficult question. How do we get a large number of people to respect the rules? Council, further comments? Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I have very much appreciated the efforts among Megan and Alex and whomever else getting the immunization van here. I understand that it's been hundreds of people who have been immunized, and to me, that is just absolutely key. The more people who are immunized, the less trouble we're going to get in. I mean, your hospitalization rates go down, your death rates go down, and so on, as long as we don't get more variants, which isn't looking good right now. But I just wanted to thank staff who've worked on making that happen.
Council, so we will have this on the agenda for next week, and we'll have fresh and updated information. We could certainly entertain more discussion tonight, or we could ask for some specific things. Maybe we could get things aligned for next week if you want. Mr. Shada.
I guess I'd like to see kind of a report, or I just want one basic number. I'm glad that the county finally got their act together and got essentially the military, vaccination rates, because in June, the county looked really, really terrible. And now I understand the county is reporting the correct numbers with all the federal vaccination rates, and we heard that number. I guess I'd be curious about what is our number for our zip code, something that's just basic so we know as a community how we're doing and how much more we kind of need to push. Just one simple number I'd kind of like to see kind of reported back to council on a weekly basis so we know how many more vaccination clinics and how much more push, because I'm exactly with Nancy on this, that the mask thing is the basic thing, but this vaccination rate, we just need to keep pushing and pushing and pushing on it. Thank you.
No, thanks. I think those are good points, John. And there's a bittersweet quality, I think, because yes, that 80829 zip code, we can see what our 5,300 plus people are doing, but we're all acutely aware that we're not a city of 5,300 people this time of year. We've got half again as many, and they're from largely out of state, and we have very limited influence. But I think you're talking about something in the right direction. Other comments? Judith?
And I just want to remind everyone, I don't know that I really need to do this, but we've got several events coming up, right? We've got the wine festival, we've got the Ascent Marathon, we've got the Art in the Park over the Commonweal Art Festival. So I don't want to see those become super spreader events that could have been avoided had we taken action. So I'm grateful that this is on the agenda for as long as it needs to be on the agenda, and I really appreciate my fellow council members because this is a really difficult issue. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Wolf.
That just brings to mind a question, and I don't know if any of our staff's expertise can help us with this, but I'm wondering if it makes sense to arrange for a vaccine clinic to occur in the park during those 3 events. Maybe somebody will say, Julie, people coming, to drink wine all day aren't going to get vaccinated. It's ridiculous. I don't know. On their way out? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, maybe. That's a good point, John. Anyway, I just thought that might be an opportunity. Football games or whatever that may start up at the high school. But when we have groups of people like that, that would be fabulous. Even if we just pick up a few additional folks each time, it could make a big impact. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a good idea. I think maybe we did have one of our vaccination clinics coincided with a drum circle evening, so we may have a precedent for trying to mix entertainment with public safety as well. So we can give that a little bit of thought too. If there's no further discussion on this, I would ask that we that staff probably put together some numbers for us for next week so that we can take another look at this. Or it's recommendations, yeah. Any other ideas on that? Okay. All right. Well, Kelly, Chief, thank you very much. Stay tuned. We'll keep watching this closely. Okay, so that takes us to the end of the discussion items. And so we have receive or act on council correspondence. Does anyone have anything? Was it that quiet a week? Okay. I'm sorry, John? We did. That's good. That's good. Okay. All right. All right, I guess not. Let's move on to the city administrator's report. Mr. Cheney.
Nothing new really to report, except we're discussing with Mountain Metro on electric shuttles, and we'll continue that discussion going into next year.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Denise?
I don't have really anything specific. Alex did see that, and so he'll be working on seeing if we can get those vaccination vans here during those times. So we'll see what we can do with that. I did send your request to the El Paso County Health, and I'll try to get that for you as soon as possible. And then I also want to thank Elizabeth and Leslie for their partnership as we work through this and as we manage through. So I want to give them a shout out, and for them attending tonight. Another evening for them, and they were willing to do it with absolutely no hesitation. So I want to tell them thank you for that.
Great,
That's it.
thank you very much. Okay, I guess that's it. So if there's no objections, we'll call it a night. We're adjourned.